it's not useful. It's fairly easy to point to, but the antithesis of that is not easy to specify. Like good as such is harder to specify as a point than evil is. But I think, you tell me what you think about this. So I spent a lot of time studying Jaak Panksepp, who I think is absolutely brilliant. You know about Panksepp, yeah? Well, he spent a lot of, emotion and motivation, but he spent a lot of time studying play, especially in children. And he was the first person to identify the play circuit in mammals, that it was actually a specialized circuit, and to differentiate it from the exploratory circuit, because a lot of neurophysiologists had presumed that exploration and play were identical. They're aligned because they're both in the positive emotion space, but there is a separate circuitry for play. And I think play is the antithesis of tyranny. And I think that play is the place where that plenitude makes itself manifest in a manner that doesn't blow the frame badly enough to terrify. Right? So, yeah, right, exactly. So you can see that, right? I mean, that's why children are driven to play, but that's also, so in your relationship, you said that you've been able to discover, let's say, a multitude within yourself and within your partner, and that you've also practiced that, which I would like to also ask you about. Like, my sense with my wife is that when we're doing things, when things are optimized, we're playing house. That's a good way of thinking about it. That sense is replicated in our adult life. And it's what children are aiming at when, of course, they do that kind of pretense play when they're young. So I want to know what you think about that idea of play, because play also has to be voluntary, right? It can't be compelled. No force in play, unless you're playing force, which, is a special case. You can do that, but it's still voluntary. So I'd like you to tell me what you think about the play idea. And then I'd also like you said you've practiced this way of looking at things. So I'd like to know about that, because people don't understand what a practice like that is. We practice all sorts of things like basketball skills, but we don't practice perceiving other people as a multitude, let's say. That's not a standard practice. So play and then that practice.
Play, I agree, is beautiful and wonderful, and I think it's a wonderful example of the two concepts I would put up against each other would be evil and love, rather than evil and good, and that's because I see everything is relational in my worldview. I don't have sort of entities out there outside human interaction. There's something evil in itself. There's evilness, a lot of it in human interaction, and love in a lot of it. I see evil as closing the barrier to the other person, ignoring their pain, ignoring their problem, ignoring that you do bad stuff for them. I see love as the total openness. I exchange everything with you. I don't withhold anything. I don't reject anything. I just take it because it comes from you, and I love you. And in that sense, I think play is a wonderful example of exercising the ability to exchange fully with the other person. While evil is, I don't want to play with you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I have done with many audiences a little game that I call the tickling game, which was inspired actually by a new psychological experiment done many years ago in England by a group of scientists who was studying whether you could tickle yourself.
Right. Which
of course
you can if you're schizophrenic, apparently.
Exactly. And Chris Frith, who made that discovery, was part of this group.
Okay.
So they made a tickling machine, so you could move, sticks that in a complicated way would actually tickle your skin. And then you could tickle yourself even if you're not a schizophrenic, because you didn't know when and how the tickling would be. But basically, when you tickle yourself, your brain already knows what your hand is doing, so there's no tickling sensation. But if you tickle the person next to you, he or she will have a giggling and it will tickle. And sometimes I do with audiences, I ask people, experiment 2 rounds. First round, tickle yourself, doesn't tickle, very basic. Second round, you tickle the person sitting next to you on the left. And you have these 800 people going from just sitting there to yelling and screaming and in 2 seconds. It's a dramatic effect. And then you say, oh, somebody didn't get any fun here. So now you tickle to your right. People scream and yell again. And this is a beautiful example of, in my view, of that the only thing that's interesting about other human beings is that they're surprising. Or they surprise us. They do things that we cannot control. That's why they're so interesting and so nice to us. We like being surprised.
Yeah.
But of course, if you went into what you call the subway, the metro train, the U-Bahn, the train in the city, and suddenly somebody would tickle you, that wouldn't be fun. That would be scary. So you don't want no control like in the train, and you don't want full control like when you tickle yourself. What you like is sort of the in-between of between control and predictability on the one hand, and loss of control on the other hand. And that's the nice thing. That's the
so do you suppose that, okay, so you contrasted evil with love, and so one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about this game was that, like, it seems to me that love is manifest most clearly in a state of play. And one of the things I've noticed with my wife, for example, is that if there's anything between us, an obstacle, conceptual obstacle, a disagreement about something, it's much more difficult to enter into that state of play. That has to be cleared away before that can really happen. And so that's in keeping with Panksepp's findings, because Panksepp found that play was very easily suppressed by virtually any other motivational state, right? So things have to be optimized, okay? And then I wonder if that play, like, is play a reflection of the love that puts someone on the border between the predictable and the unpredictable in that optimized way? Because you see people doing that. If you're playing one-on-one basketball with someone, you want a competitor who pushes you, right? You don't want to be exactly in your zone of comfort. You want to be a little bit outside that, right? You want to have that. It's a glimmer of what's being suppressed by your aim. You want to have that still around. It's like a halo. That's another way of thinking, or a penumbra, something like that, right? Something that's glowing, that reminds you of everything that you're not attending to at the moment. There's something very rich about that. And, your thoughts about monoculture agriculture, for example, are an indication of the, there's an insistence in the Old Testament. This is very relevant. This is something I've been discussing with some of my friends a lot. When the Old Testament people set out their fields, there's always some uncertainty about borders. So there was an insistence in those societies that the margins were for gleaners, right? That's where the poor could find their sustenance. And the idea under that was that your boundaries, although necessary, shouldn't be so tight that there's no room for experimentation and the marginal, right? Which I think, and also I found out in keeping with this, by the way, there's a hierarchy of DNA repair as a consequence of mutation. So there's core DNA structures that if they mutate, they're repaired with 100% accuracy. Right, and then there's a hierarchy so that there are peripheral genetic codes that are allowed to mutate because experimentation can take place there on the fringe without demolishing the whole. So that echoes that idea of the center, the focal center with the experimental fringe, that seems to echo everywhere. And that's something like the antidote to that narrow-minded technological efficiency that when did you start to become concerned with that specifically? Was that associated with your investigation into consciousness?
Sort of
with
American
the agriculture problem.
fire.
Yeah. The idea of
from
this
the Buddhist
pathological
paradigm.
narrowing.
Yeah, I think it's already it's very much in the consciousness thing. Not, of course, as fully developed as it became later, but this worry that if you exchange
And like Arnold
sort of
Schwarzenegger has to
the
welcome
terrain with a map,
pain
the world with a
and
concept,
transform it into glory.
the person with the idea of a person, which is very much what consciousness does. Then you're on the wrong way. There's a thing about our language,
You can hear his voice.
which I think was pointed out about 100 years ago, which is a very basic thing about language. We say this flower is red.
There's a vibe to it that's like,
but
could be
no,
painful
this flower is many things.
if you weren't
Yeah.
embracing
One of them
it,
having the color of red. This man is angry.
fearlessly.
Yes, but this man is also many other things than angry. This man, that's why I don't like sort of to make evil an objective thing in the world, because I think this man is evil, yes, but he's also other stuff.
Mhm.
This man is good, he's caring, and so we are not the mental states, the emotional states, the trait states that we have. We are more than that. We are much richer, and we have a language that all the time we say he is happy. Yes, but he also needs to go to the toilet in a moment. You understand? So I think studying consciousness very much brought my attention to this very, very simple fact that we tend to reduce everything. And it's practical in the sense that I can point to the flower and say it's red, and you can nod and say it's red, and we are in correspondence here, and it's good. But we also lose, each of us lose a lot of the experience and the sensing of the flower if we reduce it to being red.
Have you talked to Ian McGilchrist?
No, I've heard his name, yes.
Okay, well, so I know Ian, and we just did another podcast, which will be released soon. So his sense, he's done a lot of investigation into hemispheric function, right? And his work is very much in keeping, I would say, with the main thrust of your work. And I think he's got the neuropsychological terrain mapped quite nicely, is that the right hemisphere seems to be, I would say, more comfortable in the domain of plenitude, and the left hemisphere is the reducer. And it's possible. Tell me what you think about this on an ethical side, because I talked about this with Ian, because people with right hemisphere damage get kind of tyrannical and authoritarian, and they get very reductionistic, and much more than someone who's neurologically intact. And I asked him, well, the hemisphere seems to be, I would say, sense, he's done a lot of investigation into hemispheric function, right? And his work is very much in keeping, I would say, with the main thrust of your work. And I think he's got the neuropsychological terrain mapped quite nicely, is that the right hemisphere seems to be, I would say, more comfortable in the domain of plenitude, and the left hemisphere is the reducer. And it's possible. Tell me what you think about this on an ethical side, because I talked about this with Ian, because people with right hemisphere damage get kind of tyrannical and authoritarian, and they get very reductionistic, and much more than someone who's neurologically intact. And I asked him, well, is that worse among people who were already that way before the brain damage, right? Is there individual variation? So if you were a narrowing intellect with an authoritarian bent, were you more like that if you damaged your right hemisphere? Of course, there isn't enough case history to... know that. But I'm wondering, there's an insistence in archaic literature I've really seen this in the biblical corpus. I just wrote a book about this, which is going to
Biblical
come out in
corpus.
November. I'm lecturing about it now, so it's very much on my mind. That narrowing proclivity is it's like the sin of Adam's job in the Garden of Eden. His job is to name and subdue, right? To name and put in place. But pride, it's the pride element that seems to warp that. It's like, it isn't even so much that we narrow, it's that we narrow and then we fall in love with our own narrowing. And that's the pride. And then we want to substitute that narrowing for reality itself. This is what God warns about, by the way, in the story of Adam and Eve, when he tells both of them that they can't eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. This idea is lurking at the bottom of that. It's like, you can do what you want, but you can't replace the moral order with your own set of preconceptualizations. And that's what you're pointing to, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what's lurking underneath this. It's not the reduction per se, because that's necessary to have a point. It's something like, is it the totalitarian insistence that we got the reduction right and that's that?
Yes, we confuse the world with our image or our concept of the world. We confuse the person with the idea we have of the person. Yeah.
So you can see, it's my sense that that's allied with the totalitarian proclivity, because I think that becomes pathologized when it's allied with force, right? It's that, it's that not only do I want you to be in the box I put you in, plus everything else, but if you're not, then look the hell out from me, because I can impose that. So here's a cool thing. So in the story of Moses is leading the Israelites to the promised land, right? So it's a quest story. And that's the land of milk and honey, right? It's the land of eternal promise. And so that's always what we're doing. And that's what a leader is always doing, if he's any sort of leader at all. Now, Moses' fundamental temptation is to use force, which is the temptation of a leader. And he uses force a number of times in the story. But when he's on the verge of leading the Israelites into the promised land, God tells him the Israelites run out of water, and God tells Moses to use his words to elicit water from the rocks. And Moses doesn't. He hits the rocks with his rod of authority. He strikes them twice. And God tells him that he won't enter the promised land as a consequence of that. And I think that's a story of the alliance of narrowing and force. Right? It's that, leader has to specify a direction, and that does mean the sacrifice of all other potential directions, obviously. And then you might say, well, when does that go too far? And it's something like, when it's no longer invitational, when it's imposed, it crosses the line.
When you don't listen to the rock. The only way you will get water out of the rock is if you listen to the rock and interact with the rock. If you just punish the rock or hit the rock, you're not having a fair interaction with the rock. And what power is about not listening, doing stuff to people without listening for their cries and their sorrows. And of course, if you're the president and you can hit that bottom and you can kill 100,000 people, there's no way you could know about the screaming you produce, and that's power.
So that ties into now. Earlier, you juxtaposed love against evil, and you assimilated love to relation, and you said everything in your world was relational. So the insistence in the biblical corpus is that our fundamental mode of being in the world is relational, right? That's what the covenantal idea is attempting to express. It's relational. And but I'm curious about, you said something very specific there, right? Because you associated love as the antithesis of evil, and you immediately also expanded that to describe relational. And you said that your interaction with the world is relational at every level. Okay, so what do you mean by that? And how did you come to that understanding?
On several levels. One thing that I've been dealing a lot with in the past year has been quantum physics. That seems very different from all of what we're talking about here. But there's in this quantum physics, there's a strong tradition of interpreting it as all relationships. And all the problems you get in interpreting quantum mechanics is when you say it's out there, it's an object, it's independent of me. And when you start thinking that way, you have all these dilemmas and paradoxes of quantum mechanics. If you think of it all as relationships you enter into, and that it's not meaningful to ask, what is the world like when I don't interact with it? That is not simply not a meaningful question to ask, because if I don't interact with the world, how could, I mean, doesn't make sense to ask how it would be if I don't do that. So in many walks of life, I find the same basic structure. It's relational, and that you have to accept that unperformed experiments have no outcomes. I mean, if you don't do things, nothing happens. And our social relations are of the same nature, that it's all about interacting. And what is this guy like really if I don't interact with him? I don't know. What is this guy like really if you don't interact? I don't know. I'm a relational creature in that sense. And what's happening inside my head is relational. And I think that's in many ways the most fundamental aspect of this whole consciousness thing, is to understand that my consciousness is the collective of human beings in my head. I see and understand and put words to the world through some kind of eyes of everyone, the collective eye of everyone. That's my consciousness. And then I have my private experience, my sort of mystical experience, my psychedelic experience, if you like. I'm not very much into that, but you could have that. And that's sort of very direct and very but it's also very private. And then you can have this, I see the world through the eyes of my friends and their concepts. And that's what consciousness is about. And that's why it's so useful and also dangerous if we forget the red one.
Okay, so is it fair to say that you've concluded that what's real is no different. There's no difference between what's real and what emerges as a consequence of what's relational, and that's the pinpoint of consciousness. I mean, right? It establishes that. See, and partly the reason I'm curious about this is it's because of the implications of what we've been describing. It's like, well, if the phenomenal makes itself apparent as a consequence of your aim, then reality itself emerges in consequence of your aim. And I actually believe I don't know how true that is, but it's pretty damn true. Like, the way a person is going to reveal themselves to you is very radically dependent on your aim in the interaction. And this is true even for very bad people. Like, I've had some people in my clinical practice who were terrifying people. And you had to step very carefully around them. But it was possible to do that. Not always. I'm not going to get like wildly over optimistic about that, but it was dependent to some degree on my skill in specifying my aim. You know, like I would say, the more dangerous the person, the better targeted your aim bloody well better be when you're dealing with them, or look the hell out, right? They're a particularly dangerous person is likely to respond very violently to even minor moral errors on your part. That's for sure when you're dealing with them. But it is an unspecified question. The degree to which reality reveals itself in accordance with our aim is a very much unspecified question. I think the relationship is far deeper than we dare to imagine.
I come to think, for some reason, this may be a wild tangent to take. The first time I was in New York, city of New York, many years ago, as a European, as a naive European. I was worried. It was back in the 80s. I was worried that crime, and I would get into trouble and all kinds. And I met another Danish guy in New York, and I asked him, what do I do? You live in this neighborhood that's known for high crime rate. When I come to visit you, how do I do that without getting, knocked over? And he says, it's very simple. Just look as if you just appear to other people as if you have a purpose with what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
You want to go somewhere, and therefore you go through the street because you want to go down and visit me, and they won't touch you. But the moment you come in and you say, I'm an interested tourist and I would like to see people live in a poor life, and New York is all crime and I want to see that.
Yeah.
They'll hit.
Then you're a prey animal.
Yeah. And but also you are intruding in their world.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
While when you have your, I want to go there because I have a friend to visit. And that's my aim, that's my target, that's what I'm doing. Then you're not annoying them because you're doing something. And I think that in interaction with people who are in trouble, who have difficulties in life, it's important to that yourself, you show that there's something I want to do with my life. I'm interested in stuff. I'm also interested in you. Not because of I want to sneeze on your life or something, but I'm open to you, but I'm going this way. And I think that's it's an anecdote to illustrate what you're saying, actually.
Yeah. Well, look, sir, we're at our 93-minute mark, so that's pretty good. That's actually a pretty good place to end too. And so I'll close this way. So I have a list of recommended books online. It's 100 of them, and they're books that were, had a marked influence on me, and I picked the books very carefully. And yours is one of them, that User Illusion. I think that's the best book. That is the best book on consciousness I ever read. And I read a lot of them. So I would recommend that book to anybody who's watching and listening. It's quite the tour de force. I thought it was very well grounded scientifically. It's very well written. It's very accessible. And it really helped me think through the relationship between compression and focus and reduction and consciousness. And that was useful. I'd already been interested in Huxley's idea, of the reducing valve, which, as a function of consciousness, trying to think that through. But you elaborated on that, made it clear in a way that I haven't actually seen anyone else do. Now, Friston's work and so forth is a nice elaboration of that, and I think the same about Gibson. But your book pulled in the linguistic in a way that I thought was extremely original and useful. So for everybody who's watching and listening, The User Illusion, that's a book I'd highly recommend. It's got a lot to teach you, and it's deeper than you might think too, because it's an elegant book and it's clearly written, and its depth is somewhat hidden, which is also the mark of a master author, right? So yeah, and I had a blast talking to you today. We went all sorts of interesting places. So I'd like to thank you for that. For everybody watching and listening, I'd like to thank you guys for your time and attention, and as always. And I'm going to continue to talk to Tor Nordtranders on the Daily Wire side of things. I'm going to walk through his life in a bit more detail. He's written a lot of books. We only focused on one, really, and made reference to some of the others, but we'll flesh that out a little bit and see where else we can get. And so if you want to join us on that venture, please feel free. To the film crew here in Toronto today, thank you very much for your time and your help and for how smoothly it went. And to the Daily Wire people who put this together and make it free for everyone, which is, pretty good deal for everybody as far as I'm concerned. They deserve continual thanks for that. And to you, thank you very much for spending 90 minutes with us and letting us know, sharing the fruits of your thought.
Thank you for having me. That was a great fun.
All right, sir.
Is Heraclitus the greatest philosopher no one talks about? And what did this thinker mean when he said the world is made of fire? Many scholars credit Heraclitus with writing the world's first philosophical treatise. The trouble is, his work has been lost. But this ancient Greek sage was not only a profound thinker, he was also a poet whose style was so powerful it inspired generations of commentary. So, we might not have access to Heraclitus's original treatise, but we do have quotations from it in the works of others. Scholars have called these quotations the fragments. These few surviving lines have been enough to heavily influence thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Carl Jung, and Martin Heidegger, all of whom studied the fragments relentlessly. And if some of the world's greatest thinkers had something to learn from Heraclitus, perhaps it's not a bad idea for us to hear what he has to say. So, let's dive right into the mystical, mind-bending philosophy of Heraclitus, a philosophy of creation, destruction, water, and fire. Heraclitus' starting point is simple. He says we live in a mysterious world, and most people have no idea just how little they understand it. He says, many fail to grasp what they have seen and cannot judge what they have learned, although they tell themselves they know. Heraclitus reminds us how easily we are fooled by appearances and miss the deeper truth of things. He tells us that people dig tons of earth to find an ounce of gold. Attaining wisdom is like the digging of tons of earth, meaning it consists of removing so many false ideas, beliefs, and prejudices we have learned through social conditioning. For Heraclitus, human society is essentially governed by ignorance. Only a select few ever go against the grain and try to find wisdom. Our culture, friends, and family feed us all kinds of foolish ideas and unhealthy models of thinking. This reminds me of Oscar Wilde, who writes that most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions, their lives a mimicry, their passions a quotation. It is the job of the wisdom seeker, then, to develop the ability to think for oneself. Only then can he or she begin to perceive the truth behind false appearances. To all seekers of truth, Heraclitus gives one simple instruction. Applicants for wisdom, do what I have done, inquire within. For Heraclitus, there is only one divine element in man, and this is the mind. By mind, Heraclitus means the ability to understand the hidden workings of things. The mind perceives patterns, principles, and logic. It perceives what the ancient Greeks called logos, the deep structure of reality. The deeper insights of the mind can never be adequately expressed with words. Words refer to the surface of things, to what can be seen, but the mind has an eye for the invisible. It perceives the logos in the depths. Heraclitus writes, of all the words yet spoken, none comes quite as far as wisdom, which is the action of the mind, beyond all things that may be said. Because of the inadequacy of words, when the mind attempts to express the logos, it uses language in strange ways. Heraclitus suggests that truth expressed in words always sounds like a paradox. Men of little understanding hear the paradox and become confused. Men of wisdom hear the deep meaning hidden within. Perhaps this explains the mystical air of the few surviving fragments from Heraclitus. They are his attempt to speak to us of things that cannot be spoken of in any ordinary way. So let's look at these peculiar fragments. We begin with something as simple as it is mysterious. Heraclitus writes, good and ill are one. Day and night, gain and loss, beautiful and ugly, right and wrong. We naturally divide the world into pairs of opposites. This helps us orient ourselves in it. But in this division, Heraclitus tells us, we lose our understanding of reality. We grasp at surface appearances and fail to see the logos. Heraclitus tells us what appear to be opposites in life are, first, a matter of perspective, and second, not opposites in the first place, but different expressions of the same logos. He illustrates this in a simple yet profound line. The road up and the road down are one and the same. Let's peel back the layers of this one. First, we're faced with a paradox. How can a road lead both up and down? But of course, depending on which way you're going, the road leads either up or down, though it is the same road. This is obvious enough. Whichever ancient author preserved this line from Heraclitus must have seen something more in it. What determines whether we're walking on the road up or the road down? Well, our perspective does. This would suggest the road in some way depends on our perception of it in order to be either one way or the other. Before we are there to observe it, neither the road up nor the road down truly exist. Only under the light of consciousness does the road assume form in one of these two seemingly opposite states. You see, long before there was Schrodinger's cat, there was Heraclitus's road. Observe how carefully Heraclitus has chosen this one example to drive at his point. Without you to label it, there would be no road up or down. Without up, there would be no down, and vice versa. Without both up and down, there would be no road to connect them. And without a road, there would be nothing for you to label. This is how all things are connected. Nothing exists without its opposite and without its context. Subject and object, high and low, here and there, all these are only separate on the surface. The mind which sees the logos understands such opposites are part of a whole and can only exist together. In another fragment, Heraclitus writes, "Health seems sweetest after sickness, food in hunger, goodness in the wake of evil, and at the end of a day-long labor, sleep." Health and sickness, good and evil, work and rest, these things are indeed opposed on the surface, but under the surface, in the logos, these pairs of opposites actually give meaning to and sustain each other. When Heraclitus called the war the father of all things, this is what he meant. The world is sustained by the endless interplay of pairs of opposites, which paradoxically give life to each other as they oppose each other. This reminds me of that Buddhist simile of the two sheaves of reeds supporting each other. While each sheaf is pushing against the other, they are in fact balanced such that they keep each other standing. Or perhaps this might remind you of the Chinese Tai Chi diagram. Here, two seemingly opposed forces chase each other eternally, and in their cosmic dance give birth to the world of phenomena. This gives us a picture of the world as a perfectly tuned system, which is simultaneously in constant tension and perfect equilibrium. Heraclitus tells us the cosmos works by harmony of tensions, like the lyre and the bow. It is the tension in the string that allows the lyre to make music and the bow to shoot arrows. Heraclitus wants us to see that the world works in the same way. The energy behind all phenomena in life arises from the constant tension between opposites. But Heraclitus was not a dualist like, say, the Zoroastrians. Again and again, he tells us what seem like opposites in tension are just surface appearances. The deeper truth is that only the tension exists. Eternal tension, which is also its opposite, eternal rest. All things are born of this tension, and all things are eventually consumed back into it. Have you ever sat and looked at the fire? If so, you will know how looking into the flames, you begin to see familiar forms and images. But just as you make out one form, it has already changed and become another, and then another, and another. Looking into the flames, you see how fire creates and consumes images in one single movement. Yet for all this richness and constant transformation, there is only one single fire. For Heraclitus, the logos is like that. He understood fire much like how we understand the concept of energy today. Like energy, the fire of Heraclitus is a cosmic reserve out of which things arise and into which they perish. It is never created or destroyed, but only transformed from one state into another. One could wonder whether Einstein read much of the fragments, which sound like a poetical expression of his most famous equation. That which always was and is will be ever-living fire. The same for all, the cosmos, made neither by God nor man, replenishes in measure as it burns away. The logos, the source code of the world, is one eternal cycle of creation and destruction. Ones and zeros, beginnings and endings, change and persistence. Again and again, Heraclitus returns to the union of opposites. To him, the world is like an optical illusion. The unwise see it one way from one direction and another way from another. But those in touch with the logos see the hidden wholeness beneath it all. This wholeness remains forever the same, but only by forever changing. Think of a river flowing. Think of a fire burning. What do these both share in common? Well, if a fire stops changing, it has gone out. If a river stops changing, it has gone dry. In both cases, in order to remain themselves, both the fire and the river have to keep becoming different from themselves. This points us to yet another paradoxical law of nature. That is, some things stay the same only by changing. Heraclitus writes, just as the river where I step is not the same and is, so I am as I am not. If we look with the eyes of wisdom, we would see that change is the one thing common to all things. Like the road up becomes the road down, so too youth turns into old age, and old age yields young life. Life turns into death, and death makes room for new life. As Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, the first shall become last, and they shall become one and the same. In this constant whirlwind of change, nothing is static. Nothing remains itself without also becoming other than itself. Change is the great equalizer. It turns all things into their opposite until all distinction becomes meaningless. Heraclitus writes, in 30 years, a newborn boy can grow to father him a son, who grows by then to father sons himself. He puts it even more bluntly. He writes, the beginning is the end. All these pairs of opposites, tension and equilibrium, creation and destruction, change and eternity, these are not separate phenomena. They are all qualities of one and the same principle operating in the universe, the Logos. Centuries later, St. John will borrow this profound concept in his Gospel. He will write, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. This one organizing principle is what Heraclitus means when he says that all is one. He writes, one thunderbolt strikes root through everything. The Logos penetrates every corner of existence. For all intents and purposes, the Logos is what existence is. Perhaps you now see why Heraclitus became known as the Obscure One. Here we are dealing with a man of true philosophical genius, whose words resonate as much with modern science as they do with the ancient mystical traditions of the world. I will leave you with one final fragment, which is in fact the first line of Heraclitus' lost treatise. It goes like this. The Logos proves those first hearing it as numb to understanding as the ones who have not heard. That is to say, wisdom is tough to get, and you won't find it in books or teachers, not in YouTube videos either. Wisdom can only be acquired by looking within, because there is the only place where you can directly access the Logos. Within you is the place where you are the Logos. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for future content. And if you really want to go the extra mile, there's the Seeker to Seeker Patreon page, where you can support my work with any donation you deem reasonable. And remember Rumi's words, what you seek is seeking you. See you next time.
Sort of doing an EMDR inspired right left hemisphere sweep with the eyes. Some exercises in Kundalini Yoga and other traditions would emphasize broadening the gaze more and more making it wider like a horizon, like the sky. And that's a good thing to develop the ability to do. But I think it's good to oscillate between trying to shrink it and trying to grow it. Mm. 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 I'm going to switch to jaw stretching. Let's do a little more jaw stretching. Mm. All right. Let's call that good for now.